Today, we're going to be making the at-home Cheesy Gordita Crunch. In particular, we're going to be following along with one of my favorite cooking channels, Ethan Chlebowski, or at least I think that's how you say his name. I'm not really sure about it. This is a common occurrence for me, where I see some of my favorite cooking creators making delicious recipes, and then I've got to figure out some way to take what they've made and replicate it here in my kitchen with only what I have. We'll be starting off first with some homemade pita bread, then moving towards making a killer taco filling, and then bringing it all together into the Cheesy Gordita Crunch. So, without further ado, I believe it's about time for us to move on.
We'll start off today by proofing our yeast, a process that tells us whether or not there is any life in our culture of yeast. After mixing together about 1 teaspoon or 5 grams of active dry yeast with 1 cup or about 233 milliliters of water, you should see a bit of bloomage in 5 minutes. If not, you'll have to discard the yeast and start again. Never a fun time. While that's blooming, you'll measure out 300 grams or about 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, along with 5 grams or about 1 teaspoon of salt. Roughly speaking, we have about 233 grams of water, which when combined with the 300 grams of flour, yields a dough of 77.6% hydration. With the original 66% hydration dough that Ethan laid out in his video, I ended up with a more dense bread in the end. This could have been the result of a bit of over-kneading, however I'd also recommend using a bit more water than he did. Aim for about 1 cup of water and you should be fine. Thoroughly mix and knead around in a bowl until all of the flour is completely hydrated. Then cover with plastic wrap and let rest for about 45 to 60 minutes.
And now that our dough is well on its way to its rise, we have plenty of time to do whatever it is that we need to get done. In his original video, Ethan used this time to make all of the other fixings that went into the Cheesy Gordita Crunch. Unfortunately for me, I'm going to be using this time to fix a flat tire that I got while picking up some of the last-minute ingredients for this recipe. Lucky me.
I swear, it's always the most inconvenient times that something decides to go wrong with my car. The worst being when I got a flat tire a few years back driving from the airport at 2 a.m. on St. Patrick's Day, but that's a story for another time. The reason why I'm showing the sequence of shots is to show that just because a bread recipe requires a bit of time for the proof, doesn't mean you can't work it into your schedule. You've got plenty of time to do whatever you want while that dough rises. Just make sure to wash your hands thoroughly before getting back into the kitchen. After the rise has finished, you'll take out your dough and notice that it's a whole heck of a lot softer and workable. Start by dusting down your clean countertop with a bit of flour, then divide your dough ball into 60-gram pieces. You should be able to get about 8 roughly clementine-sized balls from this. From here on out, you'll roll thin with the rolling pin, and if you need to, add a bit of flour from now and then, just to avoid a little bit of stickage. But in general, try to keep it to a minimum. If you add a whole lot of flour here, your moisture content can drop significantly. A good technique here is to roll back and forth a few times, then twist a quarter turn and roll again. This will yield a somewhat circular knot. And remember, we're going for something about the size of a hard taco. With all of your dough rolled out, you'll place it in a large skillet on high heat. If you have a cast iron skillet, this is a great time to use it. Just make sure to dust off any excess flour before heading into the pan. It's incredibly easy to set off the fire alarm if you skip that step. But other than that, toast for a minute or two on both sides and have fun watching the bubbles rise. Now that our pita has been properly piled, we'll move on to the jalapeno ranch and other toppings. Here, I'm slicing up some of the veggies needed. 1 jalapeno finely diced, 1 lime rolled and wedged, and then half a head of iceberg lettuce cut into thin strips. Following that is the tomatoes, which dicing tomatoes is a great indication of the sharpness of your knife. As you can see, my blade isn't cleanly gliding through when I go to cut on a bias, which means I really need to get around to sharpening it. For the jalapeno ranch itself, you'll add to a mason jar 200 grams or 3/4 cup of Hidden Valley Ranch, and then maybe a tablespoon or 2 of finely chopped fresh cilantro, your finely diced jalapeno, and then the juice of half of your lime. Stir that around and taste for seasoning, but for now we're going to talk about shells. Sorry, I had to get that one out of my system. Rather than buying a whole case of hard tacos, you can make your own easily by baking your corn tortillas at 350 Fahrenheit while they hang between the grate in your oven. Here I've placed a baking sheet on the rack below just in case they fall through. I might have learned that one the hard way. Finally, let's work on our seasoned beef. To a large skillet, drop in 1 pound of ground beef and a half a yellow onion roughly chopped. Break that into bits and let begin to brown over a medium-high heat while we work on our seasoning mix. For this blend, you'll add in a sprinkling of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, half a teaspoon of MSG to boost the umami flavor, half a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of coriander, and finally, half a teaspoon of chili powder. Mix that all around and let cook through. And now we're at the best point in the process, assembly. To start, take your pita and sprinkle on a bit of shredded cheese. Zap it in the microwave for 30 seconds to melt the cheese, and then place your hard taco shell in the center, folding up the sides and letting the cheese work like a glue. And I mean, once you have that part down, the rest of the process is building your taco, and that's all up to you. For me, I like going with seasoned beef first. A bit of shredded lettuce, some diced Roma tomatoes, followed by a drizzle of jalapeno ranch, and finally a pinch more of cheese for good luck. And with that, you've made a damn good Cheesy Gordita Crunch. Again, I have to say thank you to Chlebowski for inspiration for this recipe. As for my attempt, I was real happy with how it turned out. A bit of tweaking to the dough to adjust for the dense crumb, and it'd be perfect. As for all of you at home watching, you're free to do as much or as little of this from scratch as you'd like. If you couldn't be bothered to make the pita from scratch, you could easily go and buy a few from the grocery store, and it'll work just fine. But if you do go ahead making things from scratch, send me a picture of the results. I'm always happy to see how things turn out for you. If you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe for more delicious recipes that can be scrapped together out of whatever odds and ends you have in your pantry. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.